In this video, I'll be sharing with you guys my final 2024 presidential election map prediction. After a turbulent election cycle featuring multiple assassination attempts on Donald Trump and Biden's late exit from the race, it all comes down to this moment. Before we get started, please smash that subscribe button for more election predictions and quality election coverage. During this video, I'll be categorizing each state into 4 categories: solid, likely, lean, and tilt. We will start with the solid states for both candidates and move our way up to the final battleground states that will decide this election. Starting with the solid states, Kamala Harris will solidly win the states of Washington, Oregon, California, Illinois, New York, Vermont, Maine's 1st District, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maryland, Delaware, and the District of Columbia. She will also carry the state of Hawaii by a solid margin. For Donald Trump, he will solidly win the states of Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North and South Dakota, all of Nebraska besides for its 2nd congressional district, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, Kentucky, and West Virginia. With the solid states filled out, Kamala Harris stands at 167 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 111 electoral votes. We will now be moving on to the likely states for each candidate. These are states that candidates are expected to win by 7 to 12% on election night. For Kamala Harris, she will likely win the states of Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia, New Jersey, and Maine at large. This brings her total up to 211 electoral votes. For Donald Trump, he will likely win the states of Alaska, Texas, Indiana, and Ohio. With the likely states filled out, Kamala Harris stands at 211 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 182 electoral votes. We will now be moving on to the lean states for each candidate. These are states that candidates are expected to carry by a margin of 3 to 5% on election night. For Kamala Harris, her lean states would include Minnesota, New Hampshire, and the 2nd congressional district of Nebraska. For Donald Trump, his lean states would include Iowa, Florida, and the 2nd congressional district of Maine. With the lean states filled out, Kamala Harris stands at 226 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 219 electoral votes. We will now be moving on to the final key battleground states that will ultimately decide this election. We will start with the state of Nevada. Over the course of this election, Nevada has really been an interesting state. In both 2016 and in 2020, Democrats were able to carry Nevada by a good 2.4% margin. However, during the midterm elections, the Republicans were able to unseat the incumbent Democratic governor, which is great signs for the Republicans. However, this race is very competitive, and realistically, either candidate could win. Because of how this state has been shifting, I will be giving it to Donald Trump by a very slight margin. Moving on to the state of Arizona. This state is also very interesting, as 4 years ago, Joe Biden was able to deliver a historic flip in the state for the Democrats. This time around, Arizona is just as competitive. There are many issues in this state that do play in favor of the Democrats, such as the abortion referendum, which will give them a boost. Not only that, but many Republican government officials have endorsed Kamala Harris, such as former Senator Jeff Flake. These factors really do go a long way into supporting Democrats. However, on the other side, there are some factors as well. Taking a look at some of the final polls in Arizona, Donald Trump leads in most of them. And a big issue for the Democrats in these southern states has been Hispanic voters. A lot of these Hispanic voters have been turning more conservative, giving Donald Trump a boost. Because of the large percentage of Hispanic voters in these southern states, it really will take Donald Trump a far way. And this race will be very competitive. However, as of now, I do predict that Donald Trump will carry Arizona by a very, very, very slight margin. Moving on to the state of Georgia. Georgia is very similar to Arizona, as 4 years ago, Biden was also able to deliver a historic flip in the state, carrying it by 0.2%. Not only were Democrats able to win the presidential race, but they also unseated both of the incumbent Republican senators in Georgia, replacing them with Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. However, this momentum in Georgia has died down a bit ever since the midterms, when the incumbent GOP governor was able to defend his seat by over 7%. With how close Georgia has been in the past, this will be one of the most consequential states in this election. This is a must-win state for Donald Trump, as he simply has no path to 270 if he can't even win Georgia. However, for Kamala Harris, there is a little bit of room to play with here, as long as she can win the Rust Belt, then she doesn't need to win any of these southern Sunbelt states where she is struggling a bit in. Taking a look at the final polls in Georgia, Donald Trump does hold a slight lead in most of them. I think the biggest problem for Democrats here is they don't have a margin to play with, as Biden was only able to carry the state by 0.2%. Even though Harris is performing very well in these states, she is not as popular as Biden was 4 years ago. Don't get me wrong though, Kamala Harris is still performing very well, especially in the Rust Belt states, which we'll get to later in this video. However, in states like Georgia, Donald Trump does hold a very slight lead in polls, and many other factors do give him a boost, so for the purposes of this video, I will be giving Georgia to Donald Trump by a very slight margin. We will now be moving on to the state of North Carolina. This election has really been insane in North Carolina, with so many different factors in play. On one hand, we have a Republican running for governor who has made many extreme remarks, who is also strongly tied to Donald Trump, which will bring him down in the state. On the other hand, Hurricane Helene has really devastated the West in North Carolina, where voters tend to favor Donald Trump. There are just so many factors at play in North Carolina, but this state will ultimately come down to the wire. Taking a look at the final polls in North Carolina, we see that Donald Trump does hold a slight lead in most of them. In the past, North Carolina has always been a pretty conservative state, with no Democrats carrying it in the 2000s except for Obama in 2008. However, Democrats have been making massive gains in North Carolina, coming within 1.3% of winning it in 2020. The question is, have they improved enough to flip this state in 2024? A lot of these factors, such as Mark Robinson and Hurricane Helene, will give Harris a boost. However, I don't think that it can push her over the finish line here in North Carolina. This state will be very close, but ultimately, I do predict that North Carolina will go to Donald Trump by a very, very slight margin. With North Carolina filled out, we will now be moving on to our final 3 states, the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Biden was able to carry all 3 of these states back in 2020, and if Harris can carry them again, she will become the next president of the United States of America. We will start with the state of Wisconsin. A key difference in these northern Rust Belt states is the fact that it is overwhelmingly made up of white voters. Compared to the Hispanic voters in the Sun Belt, Kamala Harris has been performing very well amongst white voters. She has actually improved upon Biden's white voter percentage margin back in 2020. This is huge, as if she can win the Rust Belt, she doesn't need to win any of those southern Sun Belt states, as just Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania will push her over 270. And so starting with Wisconsin. Taking a look at the final polls in Wisconsin, we see that Kamala Harris leads in most of them. Demographics, like we just talked about, do play a big role in her lead, but many other factors contribute as well. There are also a lot of Puerto Rican voters in these northern Rust Belt states, and as of recently, Donald Trump hosted a very racist rally in New York City targeting Puerto Rican voters. This will lead to greater Puerto Rican turnout for Kamala Harris, which is another factor that could push her over the line in these states. With all of that combined with her lead in the polls, I will be giving Wisconsin to Kamala Harris in my final prediction. Moving on to the state of Michigan. Out of the 3 Rust Belt states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, Michigan is the most liberal out of all of them. Biden was able to carry the state by 2.8% last election, even placing it into the lean column. This time around, Harris is almost performing just as well. Taking a look at the final polls in Michigan, we see that Kamala Harris leads in almost all of them. Like Wisconsin, Michigan is also made up of a massive white voter population, which does favor Kamala Harris. Not only that, but she's also received endorsements from many famous people in Michigan, also giving her a boost. The biggest thing for Michigan is that even if Donald Trump has improved upon his margin back in 2020, it is still unlikely for him to flip the state of Michigan, as the Democrats have a 2.8% cushion that they can play around with from back in 2020. With all of those factors and many more, I will be giving Michigan to Kamala Harris in my final 2024 prediction. And now, moving on to our final state, the Keystone State of Pennsylvania. Whoever wins this state will win the 2024 presidential election. Recognizing the importance of Pennsylvania, let's take a look at the final polls. Taking a look at the final poll in Pennsylvania, it is a poll conducted by Red Eagle Politics, a partisan sponsor of the Republican Party, and even they have Kamala Harris up by 2. This is huge for the Kamala Harris campaign, as it is extremely rare for a partisan sponsor pollster to have the opposing candidate up, especially in a key battleground state like Pennsylvania. Not only is Harris performing well in the polls, but the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, is also helping her campaign, which will also give her a boost in this state. Back in 2020, Biden was able to carry Pennsylvania by 1.2%, so Kamala Harris already has a 1% cushion to work with. Like both Wisconsin and Michigan, white voters also make up a massive population in Pennsylvania, which is only good for Kamala Harris. Ultimately, Pennsylvania will be the deciding state in this election, and as of now, I do think that the factors play in favor of Kamala Harris. With all of that in mind, for the final state, the deciding state in my final prediction, Pennsylvania will be going to Kamala Harris by a slight margin, making her the 47th president of the United States of America. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has really been an insane journey with months of videos and predictions, and it all comes down to this moment. Please smash that subscribe button for more content like this, as well as quality coverage of the 2024 election. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.